Thanks. Thank you very much. First, I'd like to acknowledge Jeff. I want to acknowledge Jeff Lawrence for his 35 years service to the union, including the last 5 years as ACTU Secretary. And as a number of people have said, that Jeff has overseen the rollback of work choice, the abolition of the ABCC, the implementation of paid parental leave, and Jeff has done a damn good job in keeping our movement united. And it's I'd also want to take the opportunity. I know there's a lot of Labor stalwarts in the room, but there's one in particular I'd like to pay tribute to. I know he's sitting up the back somewhere, Laurie Carmichael, near and dear to my heart. I'd also like to thank the Indigenous dancers who welcomed us here today and acknowledge them. The struggles of Indigenous people, like Vincent Lingani, who organised workers to advance land rights, are an inspiration to us all and a great story in our nation's history. Now, I know that storytelling is an important part of Aboriginal culture, and what I'd like to do today is share a bit of my story with you. I mean, frankly, I am honoured to be standing here today. Given where I came from, I didn't expect to end up here as ACTU Secretary. I grew up in a place not far from here in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, a suburb called Pagewood. My father was a true Labor man. He worked for himself as an electrical contractor. My mother stayed at home and looked after us 5 kids until we grew up, and she started work as a telephonist at the Prince of Wales Hospital. And I grew up feeling part of my community. My mum was always welcoming people in from the area, and there are a lot of new migrant families, and my mother saw it as her job to make them feel welcome. And growing up, a lot of my mates were from all different parts around the world. Now, I didn't care much for school. By the age of 15, I was wanting to get out and to find an apprenticeship. And when an advert appeared for a fitter and turner apprenticeship at a small engineering firm, I applied for the job. Now, when I applied for the job, I didn't know what a fitter and turner did. But I was able to convince the boss I was the best person for the job, and I got it. I used to ride my skateboard to work every day. I'd start at 7, I'd finish at 3:30 in the afternoon. The work was hard and the pay was lousy. And I spent a lot of my time in a 6x4 room sandblasting cast iron chemical valves. And I had to wear this huge diver's bell air-fed respirator helmet. And I used to do that for hours on end, sometimes for an entire week. And it was tough. But I was glad I had an apprenticeship, and I was determined to see it through. But I was also naive. I had no idea that the place I was working at was downright dangerous. On a daily basis, I would handle chemicals such as ammonia, mercury, and asbestos. And one of the jobs I used to have to do was to remove gland packing from chemical valves, and you'd have a corkscrew type implement and pull it out. At the end of that, you'd be covered with asbestos head to toe. I didn't know the dangers, neither did my workmates. And the minute my apprenticeship was over, I got out of there. I walked out of that factory and I walked onto a Sydney CBD site as a liftie to install elevators in high-rise construction. And for those who know, a Sydney construction site in the 1980s was a far cry from a small non-union engineering firm in the eastern suburbs. It certainly was a different world. It was there I joined the union. It was there I experienced the benefits of collective strength at work. And I remember getting my very first pay packet on that job. I actually thought I was overpaid. My wages were in fact double of what I was receiving the few weeks before. After a while, I was asked to become the union delegate. And on those jobs, I cut my teeth organising workers to improve safety standards, and by that stage, our union had taught us the dangers of asbestos. But construction sites were dangerous places for lots of reasons, and I knew that danger personally. One of my mates on the job, John Franklin, fell 5 stories to his death down a lift shaft, and it made me angry. And I led the charge to down tools on all the jobs around Sydney. And we fought till we got the change that we needed. And we got the employer to agree to install internal ladders on the inside of the scaffold. And that struggle meant that we no longer had to scramble up and down the outside of the scaffold, and that's pretty much the norm today. And we didn't just mourn, but we organised. And it's experiences like John's death and the result of our action has given me the passion to stand up for workers' rights. So when my organiser, Pat Johnson, asked me to come into the union on 3 weeks delegations, I didn't hesitate. And soon I became a permanent organiser. And I went from standing up for myself and my workmates to standing together with thousands of different workers across the state. And there's one story that really sticks in my memory. You know, when I was on a building site, a bunch of workers didn't want to start work one morning because the coffee urn had broke, and they wouldn't have boiling water to start the day to make a cup of tea. A few years later, as a new organiser, I actually went to that workshop where they made those hot water heaters. It wasn't a large shop, and clearly the workers in that workplace had very little power whatsoever. And one of our members, a bloke called Joseph, he had an artificial leg. And for no good reason, one day the boss decided to move his machine from the ground floor up to a mezzanine level. And the boss did it without asking him. And so what that meant was that Joseph spent most of his break trying to get down the stairs and back up the stairs. And so all he wanted was his tea break. So I remember I called a meeting. I remember barging in there like it was a construction site to bring everyone together to show our outrage and say that we had to do something about it. But it was very clear that those workers didn't want to take any action, even though that member had a genuine issues and the workers wanted to support him. Of course, they weren't used to the idea of industrial action, and they were actually scared to have come to the meeting, but they did make a choice. They made a choice to be there because they knew it was right to stand up for him and he needed help. And just by the fact of them going to that meeting, it was taking a stand. And when the boss saw that, that was enough for him to realise that he needed to move the machine back down. And it's experiences like that that have helped me to understand how to share the power of the collective with people at different levels. And I've learnt that you have to find a way to bring all workers with you, and that's what we have to do as a movement at a national level. Now, when John Howard introduced work choices, our movement faced one of its greatest challenges. And I used to remember the debates. We had debates about whether we stand and fight or should we just duck this one out and hang on to our resources and see if we can weather the storm. But we chose to fight. And we didn't just fight, we put what we stood for at the centre of that campaign. And I'm sure that every person here had a Your Rights at Work sticker on their car during that campaign. And I'm sure that we all experienced being approached by someone who we didn't know, who wished us well or wanted some information about that campaign. And I know because it happened to me dozens of times. And during the height of that campaign, the community and people knew what our movement stood for. Now, sadly, we were unable to keep that momentum. We were unable to keep the faith with that campaign after the 2000 election because we thought just by defeating one enemy that we'd won all the battles that we needed to do. But it's not a Labor government's job to solve our problems for us. If we want to improve our life at work, we must win support for that change in the community and then make sure that all governments choose to deliver legislation that can secure what we've already won. That's how we won superannuation. That's how we won annual leave. That's how we won the 8-hour day, and that's how we won recently paid parental leave. And these rights become part of the political consensus because we won the debate in the community first, and of course governments were happy to legislate standards that were made popular by us. Now, while we did let go of the National Rights at Work campaign, many individual unions have harnessed the inspiration of that campaign. The ASU's equal pay case is an example of what I'm talking about. That victory wasn't a result of a well-written submission or goodwill of politicians. It traces its roots back to the 1970s, when the women's movement with the union movement began campaigning for equal pay. Look at the Safe Rates campaign. The TWU have been setting that agenda about road safety for decades, and they won it. United Voice for Cleaners and Childcare, MUA for wharfies, TCF for textile workers, the manufacturing unions aiming to secure redundancy entitlements, particularly when companies collapse. And that was a campaign that was very close to my heart. Confronting workers who not only lost their job but have lost their entitlements because their boss had broken the law, had not paid superannuation or sent the company broke without money for redundancy always made me incredibly angry. And it made me campaign very hard at the AMWU. But I have to say, I share the anger that's been expressed today when I read the report of the Fair Work Australia to the HSU National Office last week. Because I'm not going to tolerate bad governance in our movement that sees our members' money misused by individuals, and I'll be moving a resolution tomorrow to set standards to protect our members' money from anyone who wants to break the law. And we can't let it detract from our agenda or the hard work that our thousands of officials and delegates put in every day for the millions of our members. When there's more campaigns that provide examples of the work that we do every day for our members. The FSU and the CPSU facing up the job cuts and outsourcing, and the construction unions who argued simply for their members to have the same laws as any other worker and saw off the ABCC. And it's these issues that matter to their members, and that's what makes us relevant. And what we see in those individual union campaigns, we must again do together as a national movement. And that's why I'm asking the Congress to vote to set up a permanent campaigning at the ACTU. The ACTU I lead will ensure that all affiliates are at the table when our campaigns are being developed. And we will dedicate specific resources to make sure our smallest affiliates are every part of our campaigns. Bigger affiliates must be more collaborative in common campaigns, and the ACTU must better resource smaller affiliates to make sure that we are all working together to achieve our common goals. And of course, we must bring new members with us as well, because while we're growing in numbers, we're losing the battle on density. And 20% union density is not enough. And our strength and our ability to reach out to the community comes from our size. And the key to growth is campaigning on the issues that matter to our members and to our potential members. The rise of insecure work is why we need to campaign on secure jobs. And job security and income security is all about the most important things in people's lives. Security for their families, security to buy a house, to pay for education, security to know that they can go home on time and take time off for holidays. And we can't let the rights we've won become an optional extra. And every day there's another Liberal Party Premier demanding an end to penalty rates on weekends, or another mining billionaire that's calling for the minimum wage to be scrapped. And we can't just defend our conditions in our unionised workplaces. We have to make sure workers who haven't yet joined understand the benefits and fight for our rights together. And the history of our movement comes from being part of our community. That's who we are. I mean, we're a movement of 2 million people. We could hardly be anything else. And if our movement isn't growing, who will there be to take a stand for the next generation? Now, I remember the MUA dispute, and I remember what it felt like when the community had our back. I remember the pensioner who turned up and pulled $5 out of a tiny purse to support the workers in that struggle. And we all know the energy that comes from being part of something powerful like that. And that is the union movement I want to lead. I need your support to do it, and I know we have to campaign to grow. And I'm asking for your support for the next 3 years, because Jed and I just can't do it alone. I mean, we are a union of unions, and we all need to work together. We need to share our will and our resources to lead the fight for working people in national campaigns. So I'm calling on you to be part of something bigger than any individual, something bigger than any individual union. You are the leaders of our movement. Our movement needs your determination. Our members need your skills. The weakest need your bravery, and the strongest need your guidance. And our 2 million members need your leadership to win these outcomes. And all Australians need our passion and our will to continue the legacy of a movement that in this country has stood up for working people for well over 160 years. And if we have this, and if we harness this, and we work collectively, then the union movement will grow and continue delivering a better life for working people in this country. That's our movement's history, and if we work together, it's our movement's future too.